Few images make people think of ancient Egypt more than this. The face of Nefertiti. There are two faces inside this sculpture. The one the whole world knows, and a second one, hidden under it, that she was never meant to let you see. Not long ago, in a Berlin hospital, scientists placed the most famous face of the ancient world into a medical scanner. They wanted to see what 3,000 years of paint and plaster were hiding. And the machine looked straight through her skin, down to the bare limestone underneath. What it found there stopped them cold. Carved into the core, buried under layer after layer of smooth plaster, was a different woman. Older, softer, with faint lines around the mouth, a small bump on the bridge of the nose. A real, aging human face, sculpted in perfect detail and then deliberately covered up. Someone gave the most beautiful queen in history a facelift, and then hid the evidence for 33 centuries. But that hidden face is only where this story starts to get strange. Because for years, a whisper has followed the most famous queen of Egypt. That she is a fraud, a modern fake, a lie sold to the world as an eternal masterpiece. So who was she really, the woman under the mask? Why was her true face buried? And how did a queen carved out of her own country's history end up locked in a glass case 2,000 miles from home at the center of a fight that is still burning today? To understand what that scan revealed, you have to go back to the strangest reign in the history of Egypt. 3,300 years ago, Egypt was ruled by a man. The pharaohs who came after him would spend generations trying to erase. His name was Akhenaten, and he committed the one crime ancient Egypt could never forgive. He tore down the gods. For thousands of years, Egypt had worshipped a whole crowded sky of deities. Akhenaten abolished all of them. One god only, the Aten, the disk of the sun. He emptied the old temples, walked away from the ancient capital, and raised a brand new holy city out of the empty desert, a place he called Akhet-Taten, the horizon of the sun. Tens of thousands of people lived there, praying in huge, roofless temples built so the sunlight could pour straight down onto the altars. And beside him, ruling as his equal, stood Nefertiti. Her name means, "The beautiful one has come forth," but she was far more than a beautiful queen. The art of this period shows her holding hands with the king, kissing him on a moving chariot, and in one carving, gripping a war club and striking down Egypt's enemies with her own hand. A pose saved for pharaohs alone. In Egyptian art, size means power, and Nefertiti is sometimes carved nearly as large as the king himself. She was not. Decoration. She may have been the co-ruler of Egypt. This limestone bust of her was carved more than 3,000 years ago and lay hidden. And then, after about 17 years, all of it collapsed. Akhenaten died, and Egypt took its revenge on his memory. His statues were smashed. His desert city was torn apart brick by brick. His name and hers were chiseled off the temple walls wherever a hand could reach them. Within a few decades, the great city of the sun was an empty ruin sinking back into the sand. They didn't just bury the king, they tried to delete him from time itself. If a 3,300-year-old cover-up is already pulling you in, subscribe. We go where the records end and the science begins, and we bring the receipts. But you cannot erase everything. Because in the ruins of that forbidden city, in the abandoned studio of a single artist, the queen was waiting, face down in the dirt, perfectly untouched. The year is 1912. A German archaeologist named Ludwig Borchardt is digging in that dead city, now called Tel El Amarna, on money from a wealthy Berlin philanthropist named James Simon. Remember that name. It matters later, far more than you might think. This was the golden age of the great museum race. Germany, Britain, and France were all clawing through the sands of Egypt, each one desperate to carry home a prize the others could not match. And Borchardt had a problem. The famous British archaeologist Flinders Petrie had already searched these very ruins decades earlier and declared them almost empty. Nothing left to find. Borchardt dug anyway. Using ancient architectural floor plans, he aimed at a corner of the city everyone else had walked straight past, the houses and workshops of its artists. And under a collapsed wall, he uncovered the studio of a master, the personal chief sculptor to the pharaoh, a man named Thutmose. On December 6, 1912, digging through that workshop, Borchardt found the impossible. Lying face down, barely 50 centimeters beneath the rubble, was the painted bust of Nefertiti. In his diary that night, he wrote, "Suddenly we had in our hands the most alive Egyptian artwork. You cannot describe it with words. You must see it." And here is the first thing that should stop you. Everything around her had been destroyed. The bust of her own husband, found in the very same room, was smashed to pieces. But Nefertiti, a delicate object of limestone and plaster. This bust is important in connection with that of her husband, Akhenaten, which was also found in the same room, and they belong together. 48 centimeters tall and 20 kilograms of dead weight came out of a collapsed building after 33 centuries with almost no damage at all. Her paint was still bright. Her tall blue crown was untouched. Only one thing was wrong. Her left eye was empty, a hollow socket where a crystal iris should have been. Her right eye, polished quartz set with black paint and fixed in place with beeswax, stares straight out at you, alarmingly alive. Her left eye is nothing at all. They searched the entire site for that missing eye. Borchardt offered a reward for it. It was never found. And that single empty socket would one day become the very center of an accusation that the whole thing was a lie. Before we go on, look at her face. Wherever you are seeing it right now, one eye finished, one eye hollow. What does your gut tell you? An accident? Or left undone on purpose? Drop your answer in the comments before the reveal, and let's see who called it. For almost 100 years, Nefertiti was simply the most beautiful object of the ancient world. The face on the postcards, the ancient world's Mona Lisa. And then, in 2009, a Swiss historian named Henri Stirlin lit a match. Stirlin had spent 20 years studying the bust, and he came to a conclusion that exploded across the front pages of Europe. Nefertiti, he said, is not ancient. She is barely a century old. And Ludwig Borchardt faked her. His evidence was uncomfortable. First, that impossible preservation. A heavy, delicate limestone and plaster object simply should not survive a fall and 33 centuries in a ruin without a single major crack. Second, the shoulders. The bust is cut off in a clean, straight vertical line, a style Stirlin insisted belonged to modern European sculpture, not to 3,000 years of Egyptian art, which almost always cut its busts horizontally. Third, the missing eye. In ancient Egypt, the eye held the soul, and to leave a royal portrait half-blind, he argued, was a spiritual insult no Egyptian sculptor would ever commit. And fourth, the silence. There was almost no scientific record of the bust for the first 11 years of its existence. She vanished into a private collection and was not shown to the public until 1924. Stirlin's theory was disturbingly specific. Borchardt never excavated a masterpiece. He claimed he ordered one. He hired a sculptor to make a Nefertiti out of real ancient plaster and pigments taken from the ruins, simply to study how the old Egyptians layered their colors. Then, the theory says, a group of visiting German royalty arrived at the dig without warning. Put on the spot, desperate to impress his royal guests, Borchardt presented his freshly painted experiment as a real 3,300-year-old relic. A photograph was taken. And once a prince had admired an ancient queen, Borchardt could never admit she was a week old without ending his career. So he let the lie harden into history. That same year, a German author named Erdogan Ercivan published a strikingly similar accusation. The museum in Berlin was facing a catastrophe. Their single most valuable possession publicly branded a fraud. But they had one witness the accusers couldn't argue with. A witness that had been quietly building its testimony for years, hidden inside her own body. In that same year, 2009, as Stirlin's accusation hit the newspapers, a very different verdict was published in the medical journal Radiology. The bust had been through a scanner before, first in 1992. But this new examination, led by a radiologist named Alexander Huppertz, was far sharper. Sharp enough to read details a millimeter beneath her skin, and read them the right way. Its findings didn't just defend her, they made the forgery almost impossible. Point 1. The hidden face. Remember the second woman under the plaster? The older one, lined, with a bump on her nose? Now think like a forger. A man building a fake to sell has no reason in the world to secretly carve a detailed, less flattering face into the core, complete with wrinkles and a crooked nose, and then bury it forever under plaster where no buyer will ever see it. That is not how you fake a masterpiece. It is exactly how a real master works. First, carve the honest truth into the stone, then perfect it in the plaster on top. The hidden face isn't proof of a fraud. It is the fingerprint of a genius. Point 2. The mathematics. Ancient Egyptian artists did not use inches or centimeters. They used a sacred unit called the Egyptian finger, precisely 1.875 modern centimeters, laid out on a proportional grid. When the Egyptologist Rolf Krauss measured the bust, the proportions matched that grid. The placement of the mouth, the width of the cheeks, the line from chin to crown, all fit the rules of Amarna art. A forger in 1912, working fast in wet plaster, could not have reverse-engineered a system of sacred geometry that modern scholars had themselves only just begun to rediscover. Point 3. The material. Chemists analyzed the pigments and the plaster and matched them to the exact recipes of the Amarna period. And when curators dug back through their own archives, they found something they had half forgotten. A second bust from the very same excavation, also cut straight across the shoulders in that supposedly impossible modern style. The style was not modern at all. It was just rare. One by one, the anomalies collapsed. The German authorities dismissed the forgery claim as a publicity stunt. The verdict was in. She is real. 3,300 years old, exactly as the world had been told. For the members who want to go deeper than a video can, the full scan cross-sections, Stierlin's anomalies answered one by one, and the proportional grid laid right over her face. That case file goes up on the Bloodline tab the day this releases. That's where we show all of our work. But proving Nefertiti was real did not put the controversy to rest. It made it far worse. Because if she is genuine, then the way she reached Berlin may be one of the boldest thefts in the history of archaeology. Picture the scene. January 1913. A French inspector named Gustave Lefebvre, working for the Egyptian Antiquities Service, walks into Borchart's camp to divide up the finds. By law, the split was roughly half and half, and the greatest treasures, anything showing a royal face, were supposed to stay in Egypt. If Lefebvre recognized what Borchart had found, the queen would never leave the country. She never left the crate. According to eyewitnesses from Borchart's own team, the bust sat wrapped at the bottom of a packing box during the inspection in a poorly lit room and was never properly brought out. Instead of the real thing, Lefebvre was handed a photograph, a dim, unflattering image that hid her beauty. And on the official division document signed that day, the greatest portrait of the ancient world is listed, not as the great royal wife of a pharaoh, but as a painted plaster bust of a princess. No mention of the limestone core. A queen quietly lowered to a princess. And with that, Borchart kept her. That is the case the Egyptian government makes to this day, argued most strongly by the archaeologist Zahi Hawass, that this was not a fair division, but a planned deception. Now, to be fair, Germany tells it differently. Their position is that the paperwork was legal and proper, that Lefebvre was free to examine anything he liked, that the bust sat near the top of the exchange list in plain sight, and that Egypt simply made a poor trade it has regretted ever since. And there is a signed document to prove the deal was done. So which is it? A fair split or a swindle? The honest answer is that the paper is real, and the intent behind it has been argued over for more than 100 years without an answer. But one fact refuses to sit quietly on the German side. When the bust reached Berlin, it was not proudly shown to the world. It was hidden away in a private collection for more than a decade, kept out of public sight until 1924. 11 years in the dark for the most beautiful face ever found. And that is a strange way to treat a prize you got honestly. This is where James Simon comes back, the philanthropist who had paid for the dig legally owned the bust. And in 1920, he donated her to the Prussian state. But Seaman always understood there was a promise attached. And in 1930, he put it in writing, reminding the government directly. If Egypt ever formally asked for the queen back, she was to go home. And Egypt asked. By 1930, the negotiations were real. In October of 1933, the German government, with Hermann Göring himself agreeing to it, was prepared to hand Nefertiti back to King Fuad of Egypt as a gesture of goodwill. The queen was finally going home. And then one man stopped it. Adolf Hitler. Hitler had seen the bust and become obsessed with her. He blocked the return personally and declared in words that still survive, "I will never give up the head of the queen." He wanted her as the main centerpiece of a giant museum he planned to build for his new empire. As here in Berlin, where 500,000 people view Nefertiti's image every year, now sit with the irony. The expedition that found her was funded by James Seaman, a Jewish philanthropist, one of the most generous men in all of Germany. It was Seaman who owned her, who gifted her, who wanted her sent home to Egypt. And it was Hitler, the man whose regime would soon try to erase people like Seaman from history completely, who seized the queen and refused to ever let her go. A ruler obsessed with erasing a people, holding tight to a queen who had herself been erased 3,000 years before. If your own family carries a story about something that was taken and never given back, an heirloom, a name, a piece of land, tell me about it in the comments. This whole channel is built out of the things people try to keep and the things others try to take. Nearly a century later, nothing has changed. Zahi Hawass and the Egyptian government still demand her return. Germany still refuses. She survived the fall of her husband's empire and the erasing of her own city, only to become a prisoner of modern politics. A priceless hostage sealed behind glass, claimed by two nations at once. So scientists scanned the most famous face in the world, and here is the secret they actually revealed. Not a forgery, something quieter and far stranger. Underneath the perfect queen is a real woman. Lined, aging, unmistakably human. Carved with total honesty and then smoothed over into a goddess. The face the whole world worships was never the full truth. It was an edit. And the woman underneath it, we still barely know her. We don't know for certain where Nefertiti came from. A foreign princess, a royal-born daughter, the child of a courtier who would one day seize the throne himself. No one is sure. We don't know how she died. We don't even have her body. There is a serious case among historians that she never vanished at all. That she dropped the name Nefertiti, crowned herself, and ruled Egypt openly as a female pharaoh in her own right. In the shadowed years before her son-in-law, the boy King Tutankhamun, took the throne, her tomb has never been found. Somewhere out under that sand, the most recognizable woman in human history is still, to this day, missing. That is the real story the scan told. Every civilization builds a beautiful face to show the world and buries the human one underneath. The wrinkles, the flaws, the theft, the inconvenient truth. Nefertiti is simply the rare case where we got to look under the plaster and see both faces at once. If this changed the way you see that face, subscribe and stay for the next one, because we are only just scratching the surface of what history buried. She stares out of her glass case with a single painted eye, 3,300 years old. A queen who was erased, accused of being a fake, smuggled out of her homeland and fought over by empires, and who has outlived every last person who ever tried to own her. The priests are dust. The archaeologists are gone. Hitler is ash. And she is still here, still watching, still holding the one secret no scanner will ever reach. Who were you really behind the beautiful one who came forth? And did they make sure we would never find out? We dig into the mysteries history tried to bury, and we don't make them up.